And I will share the screen. Okay, can everybody see that?
Can you make it a little bigger? Is that?
Yeah. You see the Berakhot 4:3, that's what you're seeing? And it doesn't look big? Okay, let's see what happens if I do this. This could be a lot. Is that really big?
Yeah, good.
Does that work?
That's great.
It works, it works. Okay, good. Okay, so Rabban Gamliel Omer, B'chol Yom Mitpalel Adam Shmona Esrei, Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, Me'ein Shmona Esrei, and Rabbi Akiva Omer, Im Shugurat Tfilato B'fiv, Yitpalel Shmona Esrei, V'im Lav Me'ein Shmona Esrei. So Rabban Gamliel says that every day a person should pray the 18 blessings. He's making that statement at the start. He's essentially saying every single day, without an exception, a person should say the 18 blessings, no more, no less. We now know that there are 19, but we'll go with the Mishnah just to remember. He's basically saying you should say the whole thing. Rabbi Yehoshua says you can say an abstract, you can say an abbreviated version of the Shmona Esrei, of the Amidah. And Rabbi Akiva says that if the person who's praying is able to say the words fluently, he or she should say the whole thing. But if the person doesn't know it fluently, he or she can do the shorter version. And then we ask the question, so first of all, this sort of sets up a really interesting conversation about fixed prayer, about what it means to pray the exact words on the page and what we do if we don't know the exact words on the page. It doesn't say anything about our sort of spiritual connection. So it doesn't say if you don't like the words on the page, or if you're not connecting today with the words on the page, or if you don't understand the words on the page. It doesn't say any of that. It's as if you don't know them. If you're the word is fluent, or like shigura means to sort of be able to say the words. If he's able to say the words, he should do it. And if not, then he should say something shorter. And then we looked, so any questions so that's an interesting setup, right? Because we might assume that no matter who you are, no matter what your, walk of life, whoever you are, whether you're literate or not, that you should be able to say the full prayers. And then we also have to remember that there was this sort of setup of prayer leader and community, and that not everybody was following along. So we also have to remember that. Any thoughts, any questions just about that setup, any reactions? We talked about it a little bit last time, but yeah, Marcia.
Well, it just sounds to me, and maybe I'm reading too much in this, it just sounds to me that if you are not learned enough, if you can't read, if you don't have access to the written prayer, then you have permission to be part of the kahal and participate in saying as much as you know, instead of just being relegated to the sidebar, that you're not part of the kahal because you don't have enough knowledge.
Great. Yeah. So you have you're not asked to sit on the side. You're asked to do your best and to say this sort of abbreviated section. Great. Yeah. I mean, you might not be asked to be a prayer leader, but not many people were. So that seems to make sense. Catherine.
Well, yeah, but what is meant by the abstract of the, what constitutes an abstract? I mean, right. I know what I do. I actually kind of do that, because it goes so fast. So I tend to read all the beginning in English, but I always say the end in the Hebrew. So is it just the blessing part?
It's a great question. So last week, this is exactly what we're going to look at. So what they mean by this, the commentators say, is the Havinenu. Now, if you look in the Beth, Sim Sholom, at the very beginning of the Amidah, I don't have it with me, but I was reading it earlier. We're not going to spend so much time on it today. Anyway, at the beginning, there's an explanation of what the Havinenu actually is. But interestingly, in the Sim Sholom, the Havinenu prayer does not exist. It's not actually in there. So you'll find it in the Koran, you'll find it in some Orthodox Sidurim, but you don't actually find the language of the Havinenu, which kind of, it's like, so the question is, do we not believe that we actually, so clearly it's not a common practice today, at least in the conservative movement. And I asked around in some, others as well. And it doesn't seem to be something that's stuck and that's really, really well, really used right now today. But this is the text, the one that I have on the screen. And we went through it last time and there were some questions, and I want to come back to some of those questions just briefly. So give us discernment, Havinenu. That is, we don't see that word in the Amidah otherwise. We have Havi'enu, but we don't have Havinenu. Lord, you know give us discernment, Lord, to know your ways. Circumcise our heart to fear you. Forgive us so that we may be redeemed. Keep us far from our sufferings, fatten us in the pastures of your land, and gather our dispersed from the four corners of the earth. Let they who err from your prescriptions be judged. Lift up your hand against the wicked. Let the righteous rejoice in the building of your city, the establishment of your sanctuary, the exalting of the horn of David, your servant, and the arrangement of a light for the son of Yishai, your anointed. Before we call, may you answer. Blessed are you, God, who hears prayer. Shomei Tfilah. We actually do have that piece in our Amidah. And there were a few questions about this language about the horn of David and the son of Yishai. So Yishai is Jesse, and Jesse is David's father. And so whenever there's talk of David, which we talked a little bit about David, but we didn't talk so much about Yishai last time. When we talk about David and Yishai, it's this sort of hoping for messianic times. And we see that in our Amidah as well, and rebuilding of Jerusalem. So a lot of the themes that we see in the Havinenu are actually echoed in the Amidah. But this particular sort of horn of David, son of Yishai, I know that we talked a little bit about it last time and there were some questions. It's all this messianic language. And essentially, I mean, I don't know, Catherine, if it matches up to something that you feel like you do, even though obviously this is a completely different prayer, but it sort of does take a piece of many of the blessings and makes it into one. So it's an interesting compromise. We sort of talked about it last time, but if anybody has any thoughts, yeah.
No, I missed last time, so
That's
good
okay.
to know.
And I forgot to record it, so that was my fault. Yeah, Ernie.
Tell us a little bit about Rabbi Akiva, because he always seems to come down on the compromise solution. Yeah. When
Yes.
there's a controversy or an issue, he's always the one who's willing to accept a whole range of choices.
Yeah, you're right. He does. I mean, he does tend to come down that way. And I had the same question because we're about to see Rabbi Gamliel make a sort of bold statement. And I had the same question about him. And other than sort of pointing out what you're pointing out, there's not much. You're right. He takes that. He often takes not the lenient opinion, but like you said, like a compromise. And he often comes in at the end to take what the first person said and the second person said, and then sort of say, well, we don't have to go, one way or the other. We can come together and form this compromise. So it's interesting that you noticed that. Rabban Gam, and we can see different rabbis taking those different approaches, like we're about to see Rabbi Eliezer. Ellen.
What does that phrase, circumcise our heart, mean? So
there's a few, okay, so you can drash on it. You can sort of have any explanation, but there's this, circumcision is this idea of covenant, right? So you can think of it like literally sort of cut your heart or open up your heart. But often we see the word circumcise when it has to do with making a brit, with making a covenant. And so it's like, covenant with God, essentially, like pour your heart or open your heart or expose your heart to God, essentially. Is that great question? All right, so that's our setup for what we're about to see in the next Mishnah, where we are again going to talk about this idea of fixed prayer and how that plays out. Okay, so Berakhot 4:4. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, ha'oseh tefilato keva, ein tefilato tachanunim. So this phrase, we could spend probably the rest of the class just talking about this. We've talked about this concept before. Rabbi Eliezer says, if a person makes prayer fixed, keva, it is not a true supplication. So if one opens the Siddur and prays the words without any thought or context around them, if he's just praying from the words, it's not real. It's not a real prayer. I'll let you sit with that for a second. We'll read the whole Mishnah and come back. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, Hamhalech bimkom sakana mitpalel tefillah ketzara. Rabbi Joshua says, if one is traveling in a dangerous place, he says a shortened prayer. So it's different than the word that we saw before, me'ein shmona esrei, which was an abbreviated version of it. This is actually a shortened version. We'll see what the difference is. Omer, Hosha Hashem et amcha et she'erit Yisrael, bechol parashat ha'ibor yihiyu tzreichem lefanecha, baruch ata Adonai shomea tefillah. So it ends in the same way, the one who hears prayer. So he should say, save, O Lord, your people, the remnant of Israel. In every time of crisis, may their needs be before you. Blessed are you, God, who hears prayer. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in this Mishnah. I'm curious. So the first line essentially says, if you are the type of person to open up the Siddur and just do it, it's not a real prayer. Okay, that's quite controversial. And then he goes on to explain to us what it means to have a shortened prayer. And unlike the Me'ein Shmona Esrei, unlike this sort of summary of the Amidah, right, where it's different, taking all the different themes of the different brachot and putting them into one, he's saying just choose one prayer. Now this one is not in the Amidah, but the theme of of saving the Jewish people and sort of being there when we're in crisis. Blessed are you, God, who hears prayer. So my first question, I'm happy to hear reflections, of course, always. But my first question is, are there any fixed prayers out there? Like, are any of you like open the Siddur, do the work? Does this bother you that this could be the case? Don't be shy. Iran, you're muted. That's okay.
The Kaddish is a fixed prayer.
I mean, they're all fixed prayers, right?
Right.
So to take us a step back, before there was fixed prayer, before there was a Siddur, before there was fixed prayer, the idea is that prayer was spontaneous. What we see in the Torah is spontaneous prayer. Hannah cried, right? Hannah prayed for a child, right? We see this sort of spontaneous prayer happening in the Torah. And so the rabbis have come to tell us that no, we actually have to do fixed prayer. And now we're seeing in the Mishnah that this rabbi says, well, fixed prayer, that's not enough. That's not real prayer. That's just what the rabbis are telling you to pray. So when you say the Kaddish is fixed prayer, everything in our Siddur in some sense is fixed prayer,
Right.
but perhaps, but it came from this idea of spontaneous prayer or, eventually it was written down anyway. So yeah, you're right. Catherine.
Well, I mean, for me, what makes the fixed prayer true prayer is, you say the words, but you think of your life, the world around. I mean, it's hard not, to me, it's hard not to have it be true prayer, just because of the way my brain is. And I think the way human brains are kind of just bouncing around all the time. But, when I get to uproot the arrogant, you know what I'm thinking about. I know what you're thinking about one day before the election. So, yeah, that's what I think.
So the fixed prayer is actually is helpful to you, but sort of generates the kavanah, like it gets you to.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it generates its own kavanah. It's hard for it not to.
Right, and just so that everybody knows the contrast, we have keva, which is fixed, and kavanah, which is the intention part. And we're going to look at the word kavanah in the next Mishnah. Dara.
I just wanted to say that it feels like a very modern notion to me to have him say, oh, this is not enough. And maybe that's just from my point of view of my lifespan and my experience, like going to shul when I was a kid and just, learning the prayers and not really thinking about what they mean. And then in adulthood, being able to reflect more and, talking to you and learning from you and so on. But it does feel sort of very modern, yet also ancient in that it was, the way When Rabbi Richmond did her Hippolyte course in Elul, there were a lot of examples of people who spoke directly to God, this sort of spontaneous prayer.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's all I want to say.
No, thank you, Iren.
It seems to me that from fixed, you go into kavanah. So it really depends on the human who uses the fixed material to reach the kavanah. So, and sometimes you need something fixed to be able to build on feelings.
Right. And the first thing that you thought of was the Kaddish. And I imagine that for many people, the Kaddish sort of evokes memory and connection to loved ones, right? Because you say the Kaddish, specifically the mourner's Kaddish, when you are observing a yard site or when you're in mourning. And so the Kaddish itself is fixed, but the sort of emotion and what it evokes for you around it is certainly the Kavanah piece. And that's a perfect example of when you start with the fixed and then you're able to bring out the Kavanah. Yeah, Ellen.
Well, I think the prayers often give me words that voice what's in my heart that I may not have the words to say. But I also think that even if you're doing it by rote, first of all, the rote itself becomes a comfort in and of itself. It brings you to a certain place. And I also think that if you're saying it by rote, there may be one day where you realize, wow, this really applies to me today. It's something that I really relate to. So even if you're doing it in a fixed way, it doesn't mean that it'll always be a fixed way.
Right. Right. I love that. And it's like many of our traditions, right? I mean, we read the Torah every year. We start over from the beginning and we read the exact same words year after year. And every single year, we find something different. I think particularly this year when we have been reading through the Parshiot and sort of saying, how does this affect our life today, given the things that we're experiencing this year that we've never experienced before. And I think that's the same with prayer. We asked the question, I think it was last week, why do we pray the Amidah 3 times a day? And there are reasons in the text. Each of the three Amidot are attributed to one of our patriarchs. Maybe it's because there are 3 sort of distinct times of day: morning, midday, and evening. There are like a bunch of reasons that the rabbis have come up with for why to do that. But I think it speaks. I think it speaks to our tradition about what we do. Well, we do the same thing over and over and over again to hopefully find some meaning in it, not just because somebody told us to do it, right? We do these things over and over to be able to experience them differently each time. I often think about, I'm sure I've given this example to some of the people in the room, but I often think about my rabbinical school. I had a class in rabbinical school, which was, and the teacher started every class with a nigun and then a spontaneous prayer. So we would sing this, a nigun, and then we would pause and she would say, opening prayer. And she would look around the room and everyone sort of froze because it wasn't anything that anybody was used to, giving a spontaneous prayer. We all like, well, we know the Siddur. And interestingly, in my rabbinical school class, there were 2 men who had converted to Judaism from Catholicism, and they were always the ones to jump on the spontaneous prayer. Like they always had something to say in that moment. And that's because they're, in different traditions and different religions, that spontaneous prayer is actually quite common and quite called upon. And in Judaism, we don't get that very often, where we're just asked to, pray, just sort of say a prayer, and it was kind of just interesting to see the bodies freeze up in the room when that, and mine included. I mean, when she first said that, I didn't even know what she was talking about, and then we sort of got into this rhythm of doing that and everybody participated. But it's an interesting thing that you pointed out. Sandy, did you want to say? Oh, yeah. And then Todd, I see you.
Which Sandy? Oh.
You.
Me. What this makes me think about is that Rabbi Lou always used to teach that, you only connect at certain times. I mean, you say all the prayers, and it's the same with meditation. Sometimes you can get into it and sometimes you don't. And so, but having that, I think those are disciplines, offer a framework for you to get into those.
Yeah. Rabbi Dorff used to give the baseball reference, the batting average, right? Like you only hit a home run so many times, but you continue to go up to bat every single time. And yeah, I think you're right. It's exactly na'aseh v'nishma, that first we will do it and then we will understand it. So hopefully if we do it enough times, every once in a while we get something out of it and we understand, what the point is. Todd.
Well, it's interesting you referred to that period of spontaneous prayer in the beginning, because I find that very difficult to generate in the beginning. I'm thinking of I've been to some Quaker services, and you sit around in silence for a long time before anyone says anything.
Right.
Then I just realized, well, Jewish prayer is the opposite. You say a lot of words for a long time until you get to that spontaneous moment. So for me, in the Amidah, it's when I get to the Moda'im prayer, the Thanksgiving prayer, right? That is when, okay, what am I thankful for at that moment? But everything before that, is per the text, and just I almost feel like it's kind of like not quite a warm up, but it's the momentum that gets me to that moment of giving thanks.
Great, right. So actually the Amidah for you is the least fixed of all of it, or allows you to sort of come off the page a little bit. Yeah. Right,
at that one particular spot, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Irene.
It almost gives me the impression that it gives room for the ones who are more artistic. It addresses all gamut of people, the one who can create and the one who are followers and the one who are thinkers, and it kind of covers it all.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, definitely this Mishnah said, the Mishnah says that there's more than one way to pray. But even more so, this sort of knocking down of fixed prayer is modern's not the right word, but is quite sort of, it's new. It's a new idea, right? To say that meaning it's new in the Mishnah, and it's and not new. They're sort of knocking down this idea of or wanting to revert back to the idea of spontaneous prayer and sort of knock down all the work that the rabbis have done to create for us this sort of fixed prayer. So, but yes, you're right. It definitely leaves room for different interpretations and different people to interpret prayer in different ways. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So now we're going to get some, of course, real live examples, as we always do. Mishnah 4:5. Haya rochev al hachamor yared, ve'im eino yachol lered, yachazir et panav, ve'im eino yachol lechachazir et panav, yikaven et libo. Keneged beit kodesh hakodashim. So if one is riding on a donkey, like most of us do, one should get down, and then you read into the line that one should get down and one should pray. And if one is unable to get down, one should turn his or her face towards Jerusalem. Yikaven, yachazir et panav, to turn your face towards the direction of Jerusalem. We know that we do that now, right? That we're supposed to face the ark, and if you can't face the ark, you're supposed to face the Torah, then the ark. There's like this whole sort of, you're always supposed to be facing east, essentially east to Jerusalem. And if one cannot turn his face, one should direct his or her heart, yikaven et libo, towards the Holy of Holies. So yikaven is the root word of kavanah. So here is where we see it for the first time. Yikaven et libo, that you should literally direct your heart. Again, the word coming from the root word is of kavanah, and towards this place. Now, when we think of kavanah, we think of the sort of spiritual or intention or feelings behind. But actually, when they said libo, when they said heart, they actually meant mind, right? They didn't understand that like they didn't have an understanding of heart the way that we have the understanding of heart. They actually meant sort of direct your mind or direct your intellect, if you will, like focus essentially, right? You should really be focusing your direction. But I think it's, you know, it's interesting how we've come to understand that. So there's to me, there's sort of two pieces of it. And again, sort of happy to hear reflections that, yes, in this Mishnah, we are actually talking about taking our physical body and turning it towards a place. And if we're able to turn our physical body towards a place, then we're going to have the focus that we need in order to pray. First, it tells us that our sort of our ideal place is to have 2 feet on the ground, right? We should get down as much as we can. Like, that's the idea, is we should be standing. But if we can't, we should at least direct our bodies in a direction that makes us able to have some sort of a focus in prayer. And actually, the halakha teaches us that we shouldn't get down at all. Like so right now we're in the Mishnah, when it's actually codified later, the halakha tells us that we shouldn't even bother getting down, because if we're in this situation where we have to think, should we get up, should we get down, are we on the way, are we stopped, etc., we couldn't possibly have the kavanah, we couldn't possibly have the attention to say this prayer. And that kind of echoes what we saw in the Mishnah in chapter 3 about if you're, watching the dead, or if you're in mourning, that you're exempt, right? So there's a lot in this Mishnah, a lot to ask. So what is our ideal state of prayer, number one? And then if we can't be in our ideal state of prayer, is it better to do everything we can to get to that place? Or is it better just to say, you know what, I'm not in a great place for this right now, and I'm not gonna say the prayer. There's a lot of layers here. So I'm curious what people are feeling from. Yeah, Dara.
I wanted to say that the turning, like the physical instructions are almost like a physical metaphor for the keva prayer, for the fixed prayer. And the turning of your mind or heart is the kavanah, the more, metaphysical.
Right.
So it's kind of like an exam, like displaying the dichotomies that we were just talking about.
That's exactly right. So you have the idea of keva, of fix, and then you have the kavanah. But what I found is interesting, and what throws the discussion a little bit, is that yikaven, which is the root of the word kavanah, which we understand to mean intention, does not mean it doesn't mean emotional. It doesn't mean anything emotional in this Mishnah, right? It literally means, I think, maybe others disagree. It literally means that you have to turn your body, like turn yourself physically to get yourself in a place of focus. And I was thinking about this Mishnah and how it pertains to us today, right? We're praying in front of the screen for the most part, right? We're sort of directing our attention potentially to one place. There are people that actually turn their bodies specifically away from the screen when they're davening and just listen, because davening at the screen does not give them the kavanah or the intention that they need. And this idea of setting up a space where you're praying in your home, now that we are doing that pretty regularly, and what it means to sort of yikaven yourself, what it means to set yourself up in a position to be able to pray with intention. I think there's a lot here. Irene.
Yeah, and that's the idea, to put yourself in the position and to feet on the ground. But does that mean to say that if you don't do it, it's better not to do it at all? Or is it better to do it whatever way you're doing it, because you never know if the kavanah is not gonna come?
Right. So that's what I think Sandy was saying before, which is that you have to set yourself, that you you have to say the fixed over and over and over, because if you don't continue with the routine, you have no hope of getting to the kavanah. The question you're asking is, if you can't be in your ideal situation, is it better just not to do it at all? And I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's what you're reading out of the Mishnah is the answer, right? Is sort of how you determine that. Now, I can tell you that, like I said, the halakha says that when it reviews this Mishnah, that you're not even supposed to try to get down off of the donkey, because again, surely you're in this sort of precarious situation, and that wouldn't allow you to have the kavanah that you need. But I don't know that everybody would agree with that, now. The Amidah is the only, like there are actually rules around, how you stand. You're supposed to have your feet together. You're not supposed to be moving around, going in and out. There are some synagogues, when I grew up, actually, there would be somebody standing at the door during the Amidah so that nobody could walk in during that time of prayer, so that you wouldn't be distracted. I'm sure some of you have seen that in different communities. And so, that's like a real, that's a real push to allow people to be in that space of real focused kavanah. And I think it's up to you to say whether or not, it's sort of ideal or nothing, right? I would hope not. I would hope that isn't the way that people think about prayer, because like Sandy was saying, and like some of you were saying, you're not always going to reach that place every single time. And here we're taking these examples of what they might have been going through if you're on a donkey, right? But you can imagine any such scenario, especially now. I mean, we could write our own Mishnah. If you're sitting in the office and your child starts to cry in the next room, should you just close the computer and give up, or should you do your best to, to keep going? So any number of examples like that. Yeah, Ellen. Oh, no. Okay. Anybody else? It's definitely a new thought, right? These two Mishnahs are setting us up for really thinking about what is the point of prayer and what guides our prayer. Is it keva or is it kavanah, or do you really need a little bit of both? And I think that most rabbis come out as thinking that you need a little bit of both, that you can't really have one without the other. And that is sort of what we're striving for, that you use the keva to have to bring your kavanah. And sometimes you bring your kavanah, and that makes the keva, even easier. But I think certainly the ideal and the belief is that we're always sort of going for both. All right, the next Mishnah is very, very short and gives us just like a little anecdote to what we were just talking about. Haya yoshev bisfina o bikaron o be'azda yikaven et libo. There's that phrase again. Keneged beit hakodesh hakodeshim. If one is traveling on a ship or on a wagon or on a raft, one should direct his or her heart toward the Holy of Holies. It's really just an extension of the Mishnah before. I'm happy to take any questions or reflections, but the idea is that in the last one, you were on a donkey and if you wanted to get down, you had the opportunity to get down and put your feet on the ground. And here we're saying you're like in the middle of you're middle of the water, and you can't actually you don't actually have the opportunity to put yourself in a different place. Catherine.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was basically what I was thinking of. It's like when you're traveling, you don't actually always know where you are, especially in relation to Jerusalem.
Right.
Or, especially if you were on a ship and it was just water in every direction. It's how could you know?
Right. Well, I think there are people, I mean, they use the direction, I feel like, is probably less of the problem in this particular Mishnah. Certainly skilled people who ride boats or drive boats know the direction that they're going and use stars and things like that to understand the direction that they're going. So I think that finding east is less of a problem, more so that your feet are on a boat, your feet are not, and we're not talking about, a Carnival cruise ship, right? We're talking about like one of the descriptions of the be'asda, which here they have translated as raft. The commentary actually says that it's wood planks that are tied together with rope, right? So we're not talking about a fancy boat. We're talking about something very unstable that's floating on the water. You might not want to stand up and start your prayers right there. So
I actually think, you know, like the whole idea of a navigator is like a very skilled job. And I think you wouldn't necessarily know where east is. I really do. Yeah.
I can tell you that I certainly wouldn't know where east is.
Yeah.
I'm very directionally challenged, and maybe you feel that way too. But I hope that people who go out to sea sort of have a better sense of direction than I do. But I'm with you. Yeah. Anybody else? So it's sort of just an anecdote to the Mishnah that came before, to remind us of different places you might be in prayer and how it might bring up different challenges. All right, where are we? I think this is our last one. Okay, here we go. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah Omer, Ein tfilat hamusafim ele bechever ir. V'hachamim omrim becherev ir v'shelo becherev ir. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mishmo kol makom sheyesh chaver ir, hayachid pator mit pilat hamusafim. So this actually came up. When were we talking about the Musaf prayer? I think just last week we were talking about different sections of our prayer and how long we actually had to say them, right? Like how many hours of the day we had to be able to complete the prayers. And one of the opinions about Musaf is that you have all day to do it. That was codified, and it's not the full day, I think is what we remember. But in any case, this is talking about the additional prayers that we say on Shabbat and on festivals. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says that Musaf is only said with the local congregation. The Hachamim say, the sages say, that you're supposed to say it with or without the congregation. And Rabbi Yehuda said in his name, in other words, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, which is our first opinion, that wherever there is a congregation, an individual is exempt from saying the Musaf prayer. So let's go through that. The first opinion is that the Musaf is only said in kahal, in community, that you aren't actually supposed to pray Musaf at home by yourself. The sages, the Hachamim, come in and say that you should pray Musaf whether you're with a congregation or whether you're by yourself. And this is where the halacha ends up. So that's the halacha from today, that we're supposed to say the Musaf no matter what. And then Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of the first rabbi who spoke, that if there's a congregation that is praying Musaf, you yourself are exempt. So if there are 10 people over at Beth Sholom that are saying Musaf and you happen to be home in your bed that morning, you're good. You don't actually have to say the Musaf prayers. So it's interesting, right? I mean, so now we know that that's not the case, and that you're supposed to say the Musaf prayers no matter what. But it kind of draws an interesting question about what is Musaf and like what is the point, right? So the Musaf prayer was the Musaf corresponds to the sacrifices that were offered in the temple on the days that we're talking about, on the festival days. And so if you think about it from not a prayer perspective, if you think about it from just bringing a sacrifice, it might feel, to me, it was a bit easier to understand that, because I felt like, okay, the sacrifice is being brought by somebody. We know that that's happening. And so I can feel like I'm exempt from that action or that sacrifice. But now that prayer has taken its place, it's kind of an odd thing to say. Oh, well, he's, I feel like you hear this, like, say a prayer for me, right? Just say an extra prayer for me. And that's kind of how it feels to me, right? That you're like, oh, the community's saying the prayer, so I don't have to do that. And by the way, it's only talking about Musaf, right? We wouldn't ever say that about any other piece of the liturgy, but about this additional piece of prayer, there's this thought about whether or not it's actually personal enough that you have to do it yourself. So I don't know, any thoughts? So yeah, Iran.
Does that mean it's less important?
Well, so that's the question. It doesn't mean that it's less important. If you go into a Reformed community these days, Musaf isn't even in the service most of the time. not because it's less important, but because I believe the reason for that is that because there is no Musaf sacrifice, there is no, there maybe isn't a need for the Musaf prayer, right? It's not relevant anymore. And so we've taken it out. But I don't know that it has to do with, it necessarily has to do with importance. I think, you know, if you start to throw out certain traditions that don't feel relevant, you could throw out a lot of things. So yeah, I don't know that I would necessarily use the word important, but maybe relevant, or you know, something that we can relate to in terms of the sacrificial language that is in Musaf. Yeah, Dara.
I just wanted to say, in the Sim Shalom, there's the second paragraph that says, for those who don't want to read the part about the sacrificial language, there's an alternative.
In which prayer book?
In the Sim Shalom.
Yeah. So there is a right, but we don't do that one. I don't know that many.
No, yeah. But it's, what I'm saying is it's offered, you know, like you were just saying, if you take away things that don't have relevance to us, it's sort of a slippery slope. So whoever was compiling the Siddur, you know, was saying, okay, well, if you don't want to read that first paragraph about bringing sacrifices, then here's this other option that, you know, you can sort of transmute the meaning of this extra service.
Right. Yes, thank you. That's true. Right. So if there isn't relevancy, so that's kind of an interesting move, a sort of modern thing, right? A modern move to say that the prayers that we're used to, they might not have relevance for us, and so here's a way to sort of channel what they may have been going for, but slightly removing some of that sacrificial language. Right. That's exactly right. I mean, you know, in the Musaf on the high holidays, it's quite, if you took that section out, it's really a bulk of what we do on the high holidays, the sprinkling of the blood, and like this whole conversation about these sacrifices. And you know, it feels like this Mishnah is so relevant to what we're dealing with right now, right? Because many of us aren't, I mean, none of us are going into a synagogue. And so Musaf becomes a real question. You know, when we've done Rosh Chodesh services virtually, my thought has been to get to Musaf and to essentially say to everybody, do Musaf on your own. And the reason for that is because much of Musaf, most of it, 90%, is done on one's own unless there's a minyan. And since we haven't had a minyan, we're not praying those prayers together, right? So you sort of say, do Musaf on your own if you want, essentially. And now it's kind of shedding a different light on that, which is that you could do Musaf on your own. Well, eventually we get to the halakha that you should. But this Mishnah is saying you could do Musaf on your own, but really there should at least be 10 somewhere that's taking this on as a community. So it kind of changes the, it just changed my thought about how to think about Musaf, even though we know the halakha didn't end up there. It's kind of an interesting evolution of what Musaf is and how it works in our communities and how we use it and how we think about it. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Ernie.
Someone, or presumably Beth Din, must have decided that although we can have services virtually, that a minyan has to be physically 10 persons together. Now, when was that halakha established? Because obviously before Zoom, that wasn't a question. You had to have 10 people together physically, but there must have been a more recent decision that virtual 10 people is not a minyan? When was that decided?
So actually that discussion happened long before the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of the virtual questions that you're asking, because, you know, FaceTime and Zoom and all of these technologies have been available for many years. There was a
Sure.
there was a tshuva in 2001 that was written about this, and the question then was not the same question that is now. The question then is, there's a few layers of it. Number one is, if there are 10 people in the room and you yourself call in, you know, like virtually call in, can you fulfill your own obligation of prayer? So I am saying Kaddish and I call into a minyan. Have I fulfilled my obligation to prayer? And the answer in that tshuva was yes, because the minyan of 10 is convened and you're an additional person there. Where it's got tricky was if there are 9 people in the room and you call in, can you be the 10th and then fulfill their obligation? In other words, there's somebody in the room who's saying Kaddish and you're the 10th person. Is that person fulfilling their obligation of saying Kaddish? And the answer to that is no. As before the pandemic. Okay. Now it's a controversy. It's always a controversy. Now, the conservative movement, or the tshuvas that have been written in the past 6 months, essentially say you can convene a minyan on Zoom, of course, but you shouldn't really pray together anything that can't be said without a minyan. So there are certain things in the service, like the Berakhot or the Mourner's Kaddish, Kedusha, certain things that you're not supposed to do unless there are 10 people gathered in a room. And the rabbis have still said that those things shouldn't be said as a minyan. Many congregations have amended that for the needs of their own community. So for example, in our community, we say a Mourner's Kaddish at the end of every minyan, not because of halacha, but because we felt like that was the pastoral thing to do. Like that people in a time of pandemic shouldn't have to not say Kaddish. And so we say Kaddish at the end of the minyan, though there are some people in our community who wouldn't say the Kaddish on a minyan because that doesn't feel right to them, or like it, halachically correct, or right. So there's a lot of layers to your question, and it's evolving, because when the tshuva were written, in March, or when the ideas were coming around in March, we didn't know we were going to be here for 8 months. And so they've evolved over the past, I don't know if you saw this whole conversation about Zoom. We actually had a member of the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards. The CEO of Zoom is Jewish, not that that necessarily matters, but it probably helped. And there are new Zoom accounts that you turn it on and it goes for 72 hours, so that there's no having to turn on and off over the Chag and over Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. You could have turned your Zoom on and left it running for 72 hours. And halachically, the conservative movement is saying that that's halachically okay. Your rabbi at this congregation doesn't agree with that. And there are people in our community who don't agree with that. So like any tshuva, at the bottom of every tshuva, it says, and the local rabbi is the Marad Atra of your community. And so people make different decisions based on what works in their own communities. When the establishment of 10 is in the Gemara, I believe, and then in the codes. So it's a long, it's a long time ago. And some even say, so the Modeh Ani prayer, there's like a certain number in the Modeh Ani that you count up to 10. Modeh Ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam shechazarta bi nishmati v'tefilati. So there's 10, and that's how you count a minyan. That's the very opening prayer of the Shacharit. But anyway, you asked a loaded question. Sorry that it was a long answer, but that's what they're working on right now. Any other thoughts?
Thank you.
Sure. So I think we'll stop because we're at the end of the chapter. But a great sort of entryway into what it is that is prayer for us. Is it keva or is it kavanah? We talked a lot in the first few chapters about these very, the very details of when do you say things, and you know, and how many hours do you have, and the sun setting and the stars and this and that. And here we're sort of saying, like, don't worry, right? There's more to it than just the timing. So when we talk about keva, we often think about zmanim. We often think about the time. And now there's real conversation about the words and the intention behind the words. And we're going to continue to see that into the next chapter of the Mishnah as well. Yeah. Thank you all for learning this morning. This is going to be a hectic week, I think. So make sure to take care of yourselves out there. Vote if you haven't voted. Hopefully